I think that the reality is that we are just at historical lows of defense spending. In the Cold War, we were spending 5 or 6% of the economy on defense, and we are spending closer to 3% now.
For 9 years, the Heritage Foundation has been producing an annual index of US military strength. And at the risk of sounding alarmist, the latest report contains troubling findings, as the country's rating slips from just marginal in 2022 to weak in 2023.
So Mark, in the Navy is rated weak. Basically, the Navy has struggled to grow. It needs to be 355 ships. You have an agreement on that between the Navy and in Congress, but it's still stuck at 300 ships, and there's not the budget to grow. So that has really contributed to the Navy's weakness.
For context, one has to understand that the index tries to measure the military against a consistent benchmark every year. That's to say, its ability to handle 2 major regional conflicts at once. Say a conflict in the Middle East and one on the Korean Peninsula.
The Air Force is rated very weak, an even lower ranking than the Navy's, because it's retiring aircraft faster than it buys them, and it also is not procuring more modern aircraft like the F-35 fast enough. And it also is weathering low readiness rates of aircraft that are not mission capable. The Army is in a slightly better position with the exception of recruiting, which continues to be an issue. And the Marines got the highest rating of strong, but it's worth noting that they are shrinking. They are making really big trade-offs for what they think the next fight will be, which is in the Pacific. And if they're wrong about that, we could have a Marine Corps that's much too small.
The fact is, the Trump administration's one-time cash infusion has dried up. Pentagon budgets aren't keeping up with inflation, and branches of the military are having to make trade-offs about whether to be modern, large, or ready to fight.
There's a debate percolating in Washington about whether to basically spend a lot more money on the Navy and the Air Force and take it out of the Army. I think that contains some risks that might not be appreciated, especially as we've seen Vladimir Putin assert himself in Europe. I don't think that carving up the Army would be wise.
Okay, so obviously at the moment the Pentagon has a budget, I think it's around $800 billion, is that right?
Yeah, it's a huge budget, right.
Right, and as you said, that's about 3%, and obviously back in the 80s, it was pretty much double, 5 to 6%. So how are we, fixed as a country, the US, compared with a country like China that's always showing off its latest wares?
Well, Mark, there are a lot of questions about what's actually going on in the Chinese military, and there are some reasons to be circumspect because we do not know how their military would do in a fight. They have not fought in a long time, and for instance, if they were to try to do a amphibious assault on Taiwan, that is a varsity operation, and we do not know how well they would fare in that. Here's some things we do know. We do know that they're showing a certain seriousness in their military equipment that the West is not. So China, even in the past 10 years, has built out a navy of over 355 ships, much larger than ours, that they intend to use to be a global power. It's not just a navy that can operate near their home waters anymore.
Some will want to know why the Pentagon can't do better on an $800 billion budget. And it's a fair point. The answer lies in procurement and other changes, but the US will also have to spend more on defense if it wants to protect its interests and the homeland.
Last week there was this story about how China is recruiting British Royal Air Force pilots who are retired and paying them really handsomely to teach Chinese military pilots how to deal with Western tactics and Western jets. So that says to be that one side of this equation here is preparing for a conflict and thinks there might be one and is intending to win. So there are all sorts of reasons why we can't really be sure how the Chinese military would actually fail in battle. But there are reasons to take this seriously and invest in our own defense and hopefully deter China from making a colossal mistake like trying to take Taiwan by force.